Hello and welcome to this grammar lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at restrictive relative clauses. What is a restrictive relative clause? Well, before we begin to answer this question, we should just recap on what a clause actually is. A clause, if you remember, are groups of words that contain a subject and a verb. So for example, I like chocolate cake. This is a clause. It's an independent clause. You can also say I don't like vanilla cake, for example. So these are clauses. That was an example of an independent clause. So moving on to the subject matter, which is restrictive relative clauses. So what is a restrictive relative clause? Let's have a look. So a restrictive relative clause describes or identifies nouns. Or we could say it modifies the noun that precedes it in an essential way. So let's have a look at this example. A doctor is someone who makes a positive impact on our well-being. So the pronoun, or it could be a noun, but this is a pronoun, is being described by the relative clause that comes after it. So someone is the pronoun, and what comes after it is the relative clause. Let's practice. Take a look at this sentence. Where do you think the relative clause is? Right, first we need to identify the noun, or the pronoun. In this case, the noun is opinions. So therefore, where's the relative clause? Here, straight after the noun. So journalists have opinions that we may also agree with. So the relative clause here begins with that, and the relative clause in this sentence begins with who. We'll talk more about it in the other slides. There are also non-restrictive relative clauses. So what's the difference between the two? Well, let's have a look. So as we said, restrictive relative clauses provide key identifying information about a noun or a pronoun. Let's have a look at this sentence. The pioneer who designed the first iPhone was Steve Jobs. Where's the restrictive relative clause in this sentence? Well, if we remove it, this is what the sentence looks like. The pioneer was Steve Jobs. Well, in this sentence, that's not what your intention is. Your intention isn't to highlight that Steve Jobs is a pioneer. Your intention is to highlight that he designed the first iPhone. So if you remove the restrictive relative clause, it changes the intended meaning. But what about the non-restrictive relative clause? Let's have a look. Well, it still describes a noun or pronoun, but it describes it in a non-essential way. Let's have a look at this example. Ali, who just graduated from university, is a professional chess player. Where is the non-restrictive relative clause in this sentence? If we remove it, this is what we're left with. Ali is a professional chess player. So the non-restrictive clause here, it provides additional information, and it can be extracted from the sentence without changing its meaning or structure. So you can say Ali is a professional chess player, whether he graduated from university or not, that's not the intended meaning of this sentence. Okay, let's move on. So in relative clauses, you have relative pronouns. Most relative clauses begin with relative pronouns, but what is a relative pronoun? Well, we use who or that after nouns for people. So let's have a look. Teachers are people, which is a noun for people, who educate the next generation. So the relative clause is here and it begins with who. So this is called the relative pronoun. Let's practice. Look at this sentence. Where do you think the relative pronoun is? Ordinary people that we know can be role models. Right, so the noun is people and that is the relative pronoun, which is the beginning of the relative clause. So we also use that or which come after nouns for things. Which usually sounds more formal. Let's have a look at this example. Teachers teach things that you can use for the rest of your life. So as you can see, the relative pronoun here is that, and that's the beginning of the relative clause. Let's practice. Mariam works for a company which studies social media trends. Where is the relative pronoun here? Can you see? There you go. Which is the relative pronoun, and that is the beginning of the relative clause. Let's continue. So when you think about a sentence with a relative clause, see it as a combination of two sentences talking about the same noun. So in a relative clause, you also have a subject relative clause. So what is a subject relative clause? Well, let's have a look at this example and we'll see. A doctor is someone, full stop, plus he or she makes a positive impact on our well-being. So the subject here, as you can see, is he or she in the relative clause. We know the subject is he or she in the relative clause. So we will change that. We'll get rid of that. And now the subject relative clause will be who makes. It begins with who, which is the subject plus the verb makes. So a doctor is someone who makes a positive impact on our well-being. We also have object relative clauses. An object relative clause stands for the object of the clause, and the relative clause begins with this object. Let's have a look at this example. Journalists have opinions. Plus, we may also agree with their opinions. Journalists have opinions that we may also agree with. So we get rid of their opinions because opinions will be twice, two sentences. When we join it together as an object relative clause, we begin with that. That is the object. Plus the subject is we, continues with the verb until the end of the relative clause. So we can also say, journalists have opinions we may also agree with. So in objective or object relative clauses, we can remove the object. Now it's time for you to practice from your book. Please go to Q Skills 4, Reading and Writing, Unit 1, page 26. Okay, what I want you to do here is underline the relative clause in each sentence. Circle the noun, noun phrase or indefinite pronoun it identifies. So one circle, one underline. So in the first one, as you can see, it says not every person who makes his or her community a better place is acknowledged for it. So here the noun is person and the relative clause begins with who until place. Pause the video and complete this exercise. Thereafter, the answer key will be provided. This is the answer key for Activity A, page 26. Pause the video and check your answers. Okay, now I want you to go back to your book on page 26 and go to Activity B. Activity B says combine each pair of sentences using a restrictive relative clause with who, that, or which. Use the words in bold to help you. Let's do the first one together. We all aspire to do something. Other people will respect it. So, this is completed with the restrictive relative clause beginning with that. We all aspire to do something. that other people will respect. Pause the video and complete this exercise. Thereafter, the answer key will be provided. This is the answer key for Activity B, page 26. Please pause the video and check your answers. This is the answer key for Activity C. Pause the video and check your answers. For more practice, please go to your LMS. Thank you for watching this grammar video.